Well, thanks all for turning up and attending hopefully the first webinar of the Whitworth Society relaunch. Hopefully first of many, and we have a sort of a superstar guest speaker as Aliza Ayaz, who is UN Youth Ambassador, climate activist, and business and sustainability consultant. She's done much work with the UK government and spoke at the UN, and she's going to give us a sort of interactive talk on carbon capture and storage. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to Aliza.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on today. Really excited to meet you all virtually. As a disclaimer, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not an expert in some of the areas that you might come up with, think of. But in my work, I deal with lots of professionals, work with lots of professionals. I work with a lot of diverse experiences in the public and private sector, individuals and entities both. And today, hopefully, I want to keep it short, sweet, engaging. I want to educate everyone on all kinds of levels, whether you're an expert or a beginner. And I really, we were discussing what topic to speak on today, I wanted to do something that was relevant, something that is current, something that could tie into all engineering disciplines, really. I'll touch into my introduction again and explain what the theme is today, how achieving effective carbon capture and storage, CCS, as the acronym goes by, why that's important. So it's my pleasure to join you today and really explain to you why the target of capturing and storing 20 to 30 megatons of carbon dioxide annually by 2030 is a UK target. Now, when the UK government set this target about 4 years ago, it was really ambitious. A lot of jaws dropped with the fluctuating politics, as you might all be aware of, and the fluctuating prioritization of the climate agenda. It's really hard to align and conceptualize an implementation plan. And this topic is not just significant for the UK, but it's really a key component of global climate action efforts driven by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is the UNFCCC, which you guys might have heard of in the news. And the urgency of this task, it's not overstated. There have been so many reports, news articles, specifically those from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which again, you guys must have heard of in the news, that highlights we are rapidly approaching critical thresholds for global warming. And this is what makes it imperative to implement solutions like carbon capture, carbon storage at scale, really. And so, sure, if the EU can achieve it, the hope is that we inspire other countries to come on the journey. And in my role as a UN Goodwill Ambassador, I am focusing on promoting the sustainability practices that align with the SDGs, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically SDG 13, which calls for urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So today I'm going to be touching on some of the engineering challenges and opportunities that CCS presents that have come across in my work. And when I say my work, that's public-private sector partnerships, United Nations, with the UK government, as well as other entities. Some of you might be working with these entities or might know some more information, some more background information, and how the UN is trying to support these efforts globally, really. And so I'm hoping that by the end of the session, we have a clear understanding of how CCS can play such a vital role in our collective effort to mitigate the overwhelming task of mitigating climate change. So if we go back to a very basic level understanding of CCS, it's a technology. It's designed to capture CO2, carbon dioxide emissions from industrial sources mainly, and then transport this captured carbon dioxide to storage sites, and then securely store it underground to prevent it from entering the atmosphere. Now, this is crucial. Why? Because we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from sectors that are critically challenged to decarbonize. We're talking about power generation here, for example, any heavy industries would just present a huge, overwhelming task to deal with. And at the United Nations here, we have different departments, as you guys might have heard of. We have UN Habitat, we have United Nations Development Program, we have the Security Council. In my work, I mainly deal with United Nations Development Program. the environmental program, and UN Habitat. So collectively in our projects, we obviously recognize that CCS is an up-and-coming essential tool in the global fight, specifically after the Paris agreements were made. And you'll see a lot of batting around in news and media about Paris Agreement targets, how they might be obsolete or how they might be concrete. But the heading from here is that by 2050, we're estimating that CCS could contribute to reducing global carbon dioxide emissions by up to 15 to 20%. 20% is what has been highlighted on UN pages on our websites, making it a cornerstone technology for achieving net zero emissions. Now, are we going to achieve it? My personal perspective is it looks really unlikely. But we are looking at several methods for capturing carbon. There is something called pre-combustion capture, post-combustion capture, something called oxy-fuel combustion. Now, again, I've limited to beginner understanding of these areas, but from the work that I do with SME subject matter experts in this area, we can see that each method comes with its own engineering challenges and applications. For example, one of our SMEs who deals with post-combustion capture was explaining to me that it can be retrofitted to existing power plants, which involves carbon dioxide from flue gases using solvents, which then releases carbon dioxide when heated. So this method is really important for them because it allows them to adapt existing infrastructure rather than starting from scratch. So a huge win in terms of lowering cost. And I know this is about climate as an environmental challenge, but really the solution to it and the journey to it is political, economical, social, demographical, all kinds of factors that you need to look at, even fiscal measures especially. And in addition to capturing that carbon dioxide, the process of transporting it to storage site presents its own set of challenges. So, one might think that pipelines are the most efficient and commonly used method. That's what I used to think. But in some cases, actually, carbon dioxide can be, of course, transported by ships, trains, trucks for greater flexibility. To what extent is this being done in the UK? To a medium extent. It's capitalizing its extensive oil and gas infrastructure in the North Sea. It's facilitating CO2 transport and storage. Again, lots of challenges on a day-to-day basis, technical faults, which cause delays. But the strategy is being closely watched by other countries as well as a potential model for basically integrating this existing infrastructure into new sustainability efforts. We've got a lot of eyes on us, and that always adds a lot of pressure on the UK government specifically, and that pressure is related to the United Nations. And so what I find in my line of work is that understanding these technologies and the challenges that present from every technology that we use is so crucial in our overall strategy to combat climate change on a global scale, because there's lessons to be learned continually. And so in the UK, we have managed to identify 4 key carbon capture clusters. There is HyNet in Northwest England. There is the East Coast cluster in Teesside and Humber. There's Acorn in Scotland, which you guys might have heard of, probably the most popular one, and the Wagging in the Humber. These clusters now, they're not only central to the UK's CCS strategy, but actually they're presenting significant steps that globally we want to take for global reduction targets, carbon reduction targets. And this is something that was introduced globally and publicly in the Paris Agreement as part of nationally distributed communities. And in HyNet, for example, this specific project is designed to capture just 10 million tons of carbon dioxide per year by 2030. Again, an ambitious target. They're trying to leverage the existing oil and gas pipelines, so less cost there. They're using storage sites in Liverpool Bay. Now, the engineering challenge here that has often come up with SMEs is to retrofit these pipelines, ensuring they're meeting any regulations, any stringent safety and regulatory standards for CO2 transport, which again has been a relatively new area in the past 5 years. So who really decides these regulations? What are the safety standards? Where is this being tried and tested? And this project, HyNet, is a clear example of how existing infrastructure can be adapted to serve a new means, a new sustainable process, a concept that is very much central to my line of work, to the UN's approach to sustainability. And as an ambassador, that's what I have to approach, strategies that are sustainable in nature and not only sustainable in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. If you move on to the second example that I mentioned, which is the East Coast cluster, now this was something that had a limited role in and more ambitious, again, 23 million tons of carbon dioxide that they wanted to store annually by 2035. Lots of engineering efforts, lots of new pipelines, modifying existing infrastructures as well. Then you've got projects like the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is a little less known, a little less in the media, but again, some of you might have heard of it. And over here, we're trying to develop offshore storage sites in the North Sea. This is work being done with a lot of private partnerships. And what's important here is to leverage geological formations, something called saline aquifers and depleted oil and gas fields, because we want something that's a safe long-term solution of storing carbon dioxide. And so this is a project where we learned that the larger the scale, obviously, the more the complexity of the engineering challenges involved. But by highlighting these challenges, we can define opportunities for innovation and internal collaboration. We've invited a lot of research and think tanks that have come in and analyzed and actually work full time on this project to identify what challenges are emerging and really practically what solutions can be implemented within a financial budget. And again, this is really volatile because of the political changes in the agenda by the government, or sometimes political changes within a private entity as well. In Scotland, the Acorn project, it focuses on repurposing any existing oil and gas infrastructure for carbon dioxide. And in this project, we had a team of about 5 to 6 UN consultants who, again, related to different engineering disciplines, and one specifically who looked at the social political side of it and understanding the cross-sector collaboration engineering. So we were combining expertise from oil and gas, from renewable energy, from environmental sciences. And this was a prime example for me of how the expertise of different sectors can be integrated to advance sustainability goals, which is a key aspect of my agenda as an ambassador and of UN's approach to global development. And again, lessons that we can transfer to other people, to other countries, to other departments of the United Nations, and other consultants who are not part of my team. And all these projects that I mentioned, they're not significant only for their technical achievements, but also because they set the stage. We have countries like United States, Norway, China, who are watching closely, and they are considering how similar models could be implemented with their own borders. Now, there can be much argument to say that some countries are way ahead of the UK in the climate game, and this is true. But some of the technologies mentioned are a prime example. It is the first time it's being done at such a scale with such complexity, with the land formation and the social demographic and political scenario that the UK has. And so the international interest, it underscores the overall importance of UK's efforts, and it highlights the potential for these projects to basically define the global CCS strategies. Now, I know we've talked about the key projects and the key infrastructure, but what are some of the technological innovations and research that is developing here? Now, around the world, one of the complex things of my line of work is how do we absorb and integrate the continuously developed research from institutions and private companies, which are investing heavily in developing more efficient, more cost-effective capture technologies. Now, at the United Nations, we try to support these efforts through various programs. We obviously encourage innovation technology. Again, a buzzword here. We're trying to transfer these across borders. We're trying to help build a global capacity for sustainability. And hopefully through the illustration of all the multidimensional teams, multidimensional approaches of the projects that I've mentioned, you can see how innovation is continually instilled in very much the work that I do. And one area of innovation that has come across is in chemical solvents and adsorbents, which are being improved to capture carbon dioxide more effectively at a lower temperature than you would expect. So that would reduce your energy consumption. So there has been increasing research and increasing use of new amine-based solvents, which are promising in capturing carbon dioxide more efficiently, which are known to significantly be more economically viable on a larger scale, and they lower the operational cost of CSS as well. Then we've got something called solid sorbent technology, which a lot of scientists and engineers argue is a promising avenue for CCS. The research and the opinion from the United Nations is inconclusive at this stage. It's one of the current approaches that we're working on. And what the argument here is essentially the materials in the solid sorbent technology, they capture carbon dioxide through absorption, they're releasing it upon heating. And the advantage here is that they can potentially lower the operational costs, the energy requirements significantly, and they, again, make this economically viable on a larger scale. So same benefit as the last amine-based solvent technology. Something called membrane-based capture is being developed, particularly in Norway. And here they're using selective membranes to separate carbon dioxide from other gases. And there's been lots of developments in polymer and ceramic membranes, which are basically making this method more viable for industrial applications. We're seeing that these technology advancements are scaling up to CCS deployment. They're achieving the emissions which are important to reduce the global climate target ambition. And so there is a growing interest in carbon utilization, but how much can actually be relayed from words on paper to tangible action using fuels, chemicals, or building materials? It's something that's being analyzed in real time, and really there's no conclusive opinion the United Nations can publicly share. It's all bit of hush hush, push under the rug if it's not going well. There's only so much that we can control as an entity. And now there's a lot of approaches that we employ at the United Nations, some that I may agree with, some I may not agree with. But in my overall approach, it's that we want to reduce emission because it creates economic opportunities. It's aligning with the UN's goal of fostering sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And really, that's what the objective is. And you have to hone in on every project that you do. What's the objective? Come back to it. Why are we doing this? And it really does get lost in the grand scheme of things when we're looking at the daily challenges, the daily complexity. Something else I did want to discuss today is essentially the policy, the funding, and the collaboration, which, of course, as I've stated, requires technological advancement, but it also needs supportive policies by governments, by intersector collaborations as well. The UK government specifically has committed 20 billion to CCS projects, and they are aiming to create a competitive market by 2035. These align again with the United Nations targets for global cooperation on climate action, including financing green tech. There's something called the Green Climate Fund. If you don't know much about it, please give it a quick Google. This is one of the main policy frameworks that the United Nations has developed. And the reason I say that policy frameworks are essential is because they are the basis of providing clear guidelines. They are the basis of providing incentives for CCS deployment. Now, you can talk about mechanisms like carbon pricing, subsidies for CCS projects, and regulations that ensure environmental safety. And the United Nations is actively involved in advocating for these policies on a global scales. I try to emphasize the importance of creating an enabling environment for climate-friendly technologies. A lot of that is long meetings behind closed doors, and these meetings can sometimes be a meeting at COP25, for example, recently, 12-hour meetings with no tangible actions. And so this is why public-private partnerships are essential in this endeavor. Collaboration between governments, between industry and research institutions, they really do accelerate innovation implementation. And as cliche as that sounds, that's the foundational aspect of it. Now, there is something called the UK Carbon Capture and Storage Research Centre, which is funded until 2025 under the UK government. It's playing a pivotal role for the UK in advancing CCS technologies. It's training, it claims, for the next generation of engineers. And this is where the United Nations has come in for collaboration by the UN for various international forums. We're trying to bring together stakeholders from different sectors to work towards the common sustainability goals. In addition to these national efforts, we are looking at international cooperation with the global success of CCS. So one thing is measuring on one hand the success of UK, and on the other hand, how is that being transpired to other countries, and how is it matching up to the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions of the Paris Agreement. So as an ambassador, I'm working to facilitate technology transfer. A lot of my colleagues work in capacity building in developing countries. They're trying to ensure that CCS technologies can be deployed where they're needed the most. One can argue that UK is not in dire need of climate mitigation strategies as another country. But what we are hoping is that by fostering the global collaboration, by having the policy, the funding that UK can be an active part of, we are accelerating the adoption of CCS, of climate solutions, and that is what will make a significant impact in global emissions. So technological emissions, engineering solutions, policy funding are all key aspects. But this brings us to challenges and future directions, right? This is the present, but what's going to happen in the future? Now, despite the progress that has been made, there are several challenges that I can think of in scaling up the CCS infrastructure and ensuring economic viability and really addressing the public perception, which really does come to haunt my line of work. Continuously, it's about what do we tell the public, what can be publicized, and it's not my decision, it's a decision of someone much more senior than me. It has to go through chains and chains, and it is very bureaucratic at the United Nations, unfortunately. But what we are involved in is actively engaging and addressing these challenges through global forums. We support the research and develop in climate-friendly technologies. And one of the major costs that keeps coming up is obviously the high initial cost of CCS projects. However, we have seen that as this technology matures and economies of scale are achieved, the costs are expected to decrease. Government funding and carbon pricing will help offset these costs, and they will hopefully make CCS a more financially viable over time. And this is why we have to continuously talk and kind of pressure the UK government, don't change your mind, don't change your mind. But unfortunately, it isn't always the case. Now the UN here is advocating for increased investment in CCS as part of the broader climate finance strategies, which I mentioned earlier in my talk. And we're trying to recognize that overcoming these initial financial barriers is crucial for long-term success. So if we get the initial capital, that sets us up for a good pace. I spoke about public acceptance, and that's a significant hurdle. There is so much skepticism about the safety and effectiveness of carbon storage, particularly when it comes to carbon dioxide underground. The effective communication is a big gap there because we worry about the safety and environmental benefits, which is crucial for gaining public support. If people aren't happy, if they don't agree to it, really, it's a big barrier to progress as a governmental organization or non-governmental organization. We have to continuously engage with local communities and stakeholders early in the project development process to help build trust and support. And again, this is where I work a lot, where I feel it's essential for the successful deployment of CCS strategies. And looking forward, I'm hoping the future of CCS will likely involve not only improvements in capture and storage technologies, but also advancement in digital technologies that can optimize these processes. For example, artificial intelligence. All of you have heard of artificial intelligence. It's being used all the time. Artificial intelligence, AI, and the Internet of Things, IoT, they're currently being explored as tools to essentially look at enhancing and monitoring the management of CCS operations. They're trying to see how these systems can operate more efficiently, more safely. And so a large part of our funding is actually going to supporting research programs in these areas, recognizing that integrating digital technology with CCS could be a game changer in fight against climate change. So I think I've covered different sections of the challenges of future directions, policy, funding, innovations, what the engineering perspective is. And I want to step in to bring the engagement element again and hopefully do a breakout room activity, if that's a good time, John. I can kind of explain what I'm hoping to do. We can move to a Q&A later and I can close. But I think what would be nice to do is if we go in breakout groups and see how we can make the lessons learned more practical and engaging. You can develop almost a proposal or some points about let's say, a community outreach initiative that promotes awareness and support for carbon capture and storage in your local area. And I say this because we're all global citizens. I'll recapture the last few things I was saying. So what I'm hoping is that in these breakout groups, you can get together and see and brainstorm, how do you as an engineer or as a global citizen effectively communicate the importance of CCS to the public? Maybe talk about your perspective as a common citizen. What would you like to hear? What would make you less skeptical? What partnerships, in your opinion, you think can be formed with local businesses, with maybe even schools, governments, agencies? And maybe one more point you can consider is, how can the UN's global initiatives, which you heard about in the news, for sustainability be integrated into your line of work in CCS? So just some thinking points, nothing too specific, keeping it broad and general, but would like to hear both kind of your expertise from an engineering perspective and also opinions as a global common citizen. So if we do the breakout groups for about 10 minutes and then we can reconvene, and if every breakout group can kind of nominate one person to just debrief what they've discussed, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks. So, you covered a lot of ground there, so there's a lot to think about. So really appreciate that kind of very insightful overview of what is a huge industry, and something that's obviously going to develop quite a bit, as you say, till 2050. You said about Q&A at the end, so I've got quite a few questions. I'm sure others have as well. But let's go into our brainstorms then, and we'll come back in 10 minutes time. So 2042, let's say, we'll come back.
Excellent. I'll open the rooms now.
Oh, we've come back. That was it. That was 10 minutes up.
Perfect. Hi, everyone.
So sorry, Steve was in the throes of his point with us there in our breakout room, and then we all got dragged back into the discussions. 10 minutes goes very quick when you're talking about an interesting subject, we found.
It certainly does. It's yeah. It's a very sort of subjective topic as well, of like how and where we should go. So yeah. Right. So from that, I can't remember what room I was in, but I know that we nominated Mike to speak on our behalf of, I think it was room 4.
Room 4.
Yeah.
Room 4.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll go for room 4. I mean, where to start? Actually, where we started was, perhaps there's a role for us all as climate champions, and making it personal to us. And carbon capture and storage is one aspect of a much broader agenda, isn't it, really? So whilst we might not necessarily start the conversation with, do you want to hear about carbon capture and storage? There may be other ways into conversations around solar energy or waste, or all the things people jump to immediately when you say the environment. So we have quite a wide range of talk about being climate champions. We had a really good point about because we've heard about the big massive industrial installations end of it, and to be honest, you can pay agencies and great communications people to help with the messages on that. But we thought, actually, how do you bring this closer to home? How do you make this personal to people? And really, how do you get to the point where you say, actually, you, not just us as individuals, you as an individual can do something to contribute to this? And Jonathan talked about, now, I'm sold on this, and I've got a pond already that can do this. The carbon, the capture absorption of algae. But actually, are there nature-based solutions that the woman and man in the street can do, and actually feel that they are part of the solution here and making a contribution to it? And I'm sure on the wider climate agenda, that's a big deal, isn't it? Instead of people, we need to move away from people folding their arms and going, when's the government going to do something about this? I mean, that's obviously a big part of it, but actually, when are you and you and you and you and you going to do your bit as well? And we all have a contribution to make. So if we can turn it into something tangible that people can do and is contributing to it, it might become a bit of an easier sell. And then finally, just to wrap up, because I've yacked on enough, we talked about integration into our line of work. We only had a minute on that. We felt that was really quite tricky. It really depends what your line of work is. Whilst, you know, the wider sustainability agenda, absolutely every line of work can do something with that. We were scratching our heads a little bit with carbon capture, to be fair. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions?
In our room, are you happy for me to talk, or John, would you like to talk? Steve, would you like to talk? We didn't really get down to nominating somebody.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, what was interesting, I'll start with the integration in our workplaces first, actually. And Steve was in the throes of his talk as well, because he works in the aero industry. But John and I are both involved in renewables. So we actually do actively try and help with climate change. I think all engineers do, actually, to be fair. Everyone in the Whitworth Society I've spoken to has a link to something to do with climate and energy anyway. But Steve was getting into his work with alternative power for aircraft and using fuel cells, what have you. But that in itself has inherent issues in terms of how do you produce the hydrogen and the energy that's involved in that, and how do you scale that up and what have you. So that was we didn't quite conclude that discussion. But I think what we came to, I use this analogy of, you know, the NHS and smoking. You know, you can invest a lot of money in the NHS to solve or treat people with cancer when they're smoking. But then what you can do is you can stop people smoking, and they don't need the NHS to do that in the first place. And I think the carbon capture technologies are a little bit like that. You're trying to capture all this carbon that you're producing and belching out from these huge power plants and what have you. And I did some sums because I'm also on the green side of things as well. And I think everyone should have a tree in the garden, and, you know, without being a total tree hugger, but I think we can all do our bit. But I just did a quick sort of sums, and the amount of carbon that a power station generates is in the millions of tons, obviously, a year. The amount of carbon a tree will absorb is 21 kilos a year. So you need an awful lot of trees to offset that. I looked at peat bogs, algae, all that sort of stuff, and the natural solution isn't there to cope with what we're putting out in the environment in the first place. So again, John and I, from the sort of renewable side of things, were saying, well, why hasn't every house got a solar panel on its roof? Why haven't we got little mini wind turbines in our gardens? You can solve that with policy, as Aliza was saying, whereas new builds all have to have solar farms as part of the development, and you can look at the environment conditions. Now, again, they're not without the problems, because obviously they need energy to produce them as well, and so it's not an easy task to solve, I think. But I think our point of view is CCS is great. And I think every power plant that's going to be, or any industrial complex that's going to be generating a lot of carbon, should have something in this as part of that kind of build, and maybe even have retrofit solutions, and, you know, the charging carbon. I forget what you said, what the term was, Aliza, but carbon pricing on the big polluters, to encourage them to retrofit and do their bit, because it might be a necessary evil. You have to produce carbon, but when you're in these industries, I think that's one solution. But I think in general we should be trying to come up with alternatives that don't produce carbon in the first place. I think that we had that consensus in our room, I think.
Absolutely.
Any other rooms left?
I'll jump in for room 3 if that's okay. So we had a really interesting conversation, for me anyway. I'm now moving into a decarbonisation role for power stations, looking at supplying hydrogen and installing carbon capture. So it's very topical. It was really good hearing from the other guys their concept of what carbon capture is, and that for me, working in the industry, I've got a good understanding of it. That's what my background's been in, and my assumption is that hearing a lot of wind, a lot of net zero targets in the news, I pick up on it. So I feel, oh yeah, people are talking about it, people understand this. But actually, people understand wind, people understand the other technologies, not necessarily carbon capture. So I think it's that hurdle that you need to get over and get to people to understand, okay, this is here as well, this is the other option. I mean, to give you an example from our local council, we had the councillors to one of our power stations that were looking to fit carbon capture to. And let alone did no one really understand what carbon capture was. Only 2 of the councillors realised there was a power station in the middle of their constituency. So there's a lot of understanding to be had there to try and get people engaged and on board.
Fantastic.
I think I drew the short straw on our group, so I'll go next. That's all right. We spend a lot more time talking about how we can apply it to our industries, and it's very difficult to retrofit things. It's a lot easier, like Kevin was saying, to stop the problem at source. So it's your carbon footprint to begin with, and reducing also transport and logistics or manufacturing processes and stuff like that. I work for a vertical farming company, and it uses a lot of energy to replace the sun. So we try and use energy from sustainable and renewable sources. But we are actually partnering with Blenheim Estate and another company to start a forest factory where we grow trees from seed to sapling in a vertical farm at an accelerated rate, and then plant them out into the estate, both for reforestation and carbon capture. So that's something that we're trying to do ourselves. And then building on the other point is that the public are scared of stuff they don't understand. So I think a lot of especially misinformation at the moment is rife. So if they don't know it's a thing, and then this new technology comes along and we say, well, there's a load of funding going to do this project, and they don't understand what it is, there could be a lot of backlash, and they don't understand why they're doing it, how it works, what it is. So I think, sort of public service announcements and educating people about what this is and how it works would alleviate a lot of problems.
Great. I think that's all the rooms. Got any left?
No, that's the room. So it was 4 rooms.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you everyone for your engagement and contributions. That's what makes any session kind of enriching and productive. And as we can see with the discussion, it is clear that the UK's CCS targets by 2030, it is a complex goal, but it is achievable in terms of implementation. We have got the brains, the sciences, but the journey is in fact filled with lots of hurdles. And really there's a question on a day-to-day basis, where in the solution of cycles and challenges do you choose to compromise? And when I say you, it could be an entity, it could be an individual, really any power-making authoritative figure. And one thing that has come up again and again is the use of jargon. We need to break down terms for the common man, for the common person, and that makes intersectoral collaboration better, makes working between teams better. And this is a small change that really goes a long way in terms of collaborative efforts and really aspiring for strategic investment engineering excellence one day. And I think I would like to encourage everyone to stay engaged with these topics, to think about how you can contribute in your line of work or in your community. I am conscious of time. I know John needs to go and I need to go at 9 p.m. I'd be very happy to pass up my details for any questions that anybody has on my email. Very happy to respond. But Kevin and John, it's over to you now.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for contributing. Thank you, Aliza, for giving up your time as well, valuable time. I know you're very busy. I've personally found this very enriching. We've covered a lot of ground, I think. In our breakout sessions, I think we've had some interesting discussions. I think it's clear, again, it reinforces what the Whitworth Society is all about. We're all engineers in different fields, working across disciplines for the good of humanity. And I think we'll all touch on these related subjects, and it's interesting just in this group again to hear from people that I might not have heard from a while. And we are, and we're say across a lot of different industries and doing great work. So I'm sure we all will continue to push this sort of environmental agenda. I think one of the things that, just coming back to your point about getting the jargon out of the message and what have you, I think the other thing that I forgot to mention in our breakout group was a strong cost benefit analysis that's clear to say, this is the best way forward. I think would be a good sell, against a big offshore wind farm, which is going to solve this problem at source, against the carbon technology, which is a sticking plaster on a broken leg, if you like. So I think that would be something I'd like to see more of, and other alternative technologies, because the air source heat pumps that we've been pushed, I fail to see the benefit of that. And for my particular home here in the northeast of England, it wouldn't work, and it would cost me a lot of money, and I'd be forced down something that would be inefficient when I've already invested in technologies that make my house as efficient as they can possibly be, that sort of thing as well. So I think it's sort of seeing the league table and being confident that the policymakers are making the right decisions on our behalf. Remember the old UK PLC. We don't talk about UK PLC anymore, but we run it as a business. You're taking that 20 billion pounds that you mentioned that they're investing in carbon capture technology, is that a wise spend? Is it not, are we chasing ghosts with this, or should we put that 20 billion pounds into marine energy, which is my personal baby, which hasn't gained any traction, and there's a massive potential for marine energy off the north coast of Scotland there, and I'd rather see that money spent there, to be fair. But I have got a vested interest in that. But as I can see the cost benefit analysis there. So, and I think just one final point from me: if we have, instead of UK PLC, we have Earth.org, or whatever we want to call it, we're a planet. We're not just the UK, because the UK is doing a lot of good work, but we're just a very, very tiny polluter on this huge planet. We've got USA, we've got China, we've got India, and all the other sort of emerging industries. They need to be doing their bit as well, and it needs to be a global message, not just European, UK, or whatever as well.
Yeah, I mean, as a collective, I think the main points, if what you could express to the UN, Aliza, would be we need to do more at the grassroots levels to make sure that communities understand what carbon capture is, and the implementation of it, and how they can do it, start something at a grassroots level, and not necessarily retrofitting. Yeah, retrofitting's good, but we need to attack the source as well. And I think as a collective, that's pretty much what we all have agreed on. And it's not necessarily always massive industrial engineering projects. It can be engineering a project in your back garden that can start to make a change. And I think that as a collective, we'd like to put that forward. If everyone's sort of in agreement with that.
Absolutely, yeah, because it doesn't have to be the industrial solutions. Everyone can do their bit, I think, as well. And if we have small scale solutions, that would be good. But again, it's having that strong cost benefit analysis that we can then, if we've got a handbook or something that we can relate to when we're talking to people about it, then it's got strong facts and figures based in science and not politics. That would be a big win, I think.
Yeah, just echoing on all of that, I think kind of fine-tuning the funding mechanisms, who pledges the money, why is it going to one specific area, is it really chasing tangible goals, and again, there's lots of financing models that being explored the UK government, green bonds, investment funds, really who's earmarking these, where's the industry collaboration, we've still got companies like BP, Shell, and Equinor, which are funding research institutions. So how much of this research is biased, unbiased, and how are we aligning to any legislative or regulatory framework? So lots of things to fine tune, and definitely hear your comments and feedback as a collective. Thank you everyone for your time.
And thank you once again for giving up your time to talk to us this evening. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Everyone.
much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.